Franklin, thank you very much for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. He didn't mention I was a former Rotarian out of St. Tammany Parish and Paul Harris Fellow, so I understand the rules of the road. 1 o'clock, you all get up and leave, and you heard I had those 3 married daughters. Many a time I was still talking, and I looked up, and there was nobody at the table, including my wife, so very familiar. I want to first apologize, and I want to thank you for the billboard, but Hiller, I'm sorry, but I think there was a 20% increase in accidents out there in the last few days when that picture popped up, so sorry about that. You should kind of do a little bit more due diligence. I'm going to talk to you today about my office, but more specifically, the most important thing of the function of Secretary of State is Chief Elections Officer. And quite frankly, the election from 16's never ended for us. We've never really gone through a presidential cycle like we did. I mean, usually you have the run-up, it's enthusiastic, it's the Super Bowl, Final Four of elections, but usually it ends. This election continues, and what do I mean by that? Russian hacking of the machines, Russian cyberspace attacks, voter fraud commission, asking for data. I mean, I could go on and on and on, and it's like the new wave of which we live. And it's coupled, in my opinion, depending on what nightly news you watch. And you know, I learned this phrase today from Meg Casper, my press secretary. Is there a way to balance staying informed and stay sane at the same time? Because it makes no difference what news media you look at. Where do you get accurate information today? I come out of the era of Walter Cronkite. They reported the news, you factored it, and you decided. You didn't have commentaries that gave you 24/7 news. And let's face it, we all watch news that is reflective of our politics. Have you ever tried to just start switching channels at the same moment on the same historic event? You'd swear you're dealing with different issues. So we're in that environment today, and to me, it's one of the reasons why we've seen less voter participation across the country at dramatic proportions, and certainly here in Louisiana. We have a treasurer's race coming up in October. How many of you are aware of that? Okay, well, that's good. You're a much more astute group than most I speak to. We probably won't hit 20%. 18% voter turnout. You'll have a fairly large turnout in Orleans Parish that will raise it, but across the state, you're not talking about anything of any magnitude. So what is the problem? It's also starting to be reflective in those qualifying for office. We had 105 races to qualify for the October 14th election. We've already decided 56% of them. 56% of those elections, either no one qualified, including a school board race and a couple of others fairly significant races, or only the incumbent or no incumbent and someone else qualified. So literally in those 14 races that no one qualified, somebody could have walked in at the last second and qualified, and they would be the elected official, would be on the school board. I mean, there's something seriously wrong when we look at that statistic. And that's not just an anomaly. That happened on the last election cycle when we first noticed it. And it's starting to draw our attention. You know, protecting elections, in my opinion, is utmost importance. And it's becoming more and more difficult as we move through this process with the environment we live in. Again, watch the nightly news. Voter fraud commission of President Trump wanting personalized data on you. I refused that data for this reason. I refused President Obama the same data in a lawsuit with the Department of Justice against the state of Louisiana. And that pertained to your voting record, your name, your address, your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and your date of birth. Now, do you want me sending that outside of the state of Louisiana? Now, what we will send them to cooperate is simply what we call the commercial list, if they want to pay $5,000 for it, that I would give to anyone that you can go on my site right now and get. It just gives your name, your address, your party affiliation, and frequency of your vote, not how many times you voted. I mean, who you voted for, excuse me. So it's a new era. Elections, right before President Obama left office, 2 weeks at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, he put elections nationwide into what they call critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is something that was done after 9/11 when we put the banking system, our energy system, the grid, our food supply, and various other things. Elections are now put into that. I quite frankly was very opposed to that. I think it's a first step to possibly nationalizing elections, which I'm adamantly against. Elections in the Constitution is the time, place, and manner of the state's rights to do that. Some states have photo ID, some states don't. Some states have early voting for a month, some states have a week. Some have no early voting. The state of New Hampshire has no early voting. The first state in the country that defines our president in a primary does not early vote. But that's what the people of New Hampshire want. The state of Oregon, which is a movement by some political factions, is an all-paper ballot state, no machine, automatic registration at the Department of Motor Vehicles, same-day registration. You go in, you register and you vote, no photo ID. Can you imagine sending just everybody turns 18, becomes automatic? What happened to the day of just going in and registering to vote? It's not that difficult. You can actually go online today. We were the third state in the country to offer online voter registration. You can go online and do that in about 3 minutes. It's live, it's secure, but we have people that are in a mall will give people their Social Security numbers and fill out a registration form in hopes that they'll turn it in this day and time. So it's simpler than ever to vote, but yet we still have the problem that I've indicated to you. We were the first state in the country to offer Go Vote, G-E-A-U-X, as you would suspect. It's an app. We won an award for it. We were the first state in the country to do it. 8 states have emulated the program, or parts of it. It gives you exactly how you register to vote at the Register of Voters office. It gives you indication if he or she may need some maintenance. You're getting return mail. Maybe you're on an inactive list. They're looking for you. It also gives you ability to mock vote on this phone. And I indicate the word mock. You can bring it into the precinct and use it as a guide, and you'd say, well, I know who I'm voting for governor or U.S. Senate, but you probably didn't know how you were going to vote on those 10 constitutional amendments that you didn't even know were on the ballot. And you could read them 10 times and you probably still don't know which you're voting for. So, and that includes legislators after we leave, all right? I was in the Senate for 12 years, and quite frankly, you get back to your district, and it's a little difficult sometimes to ascertain exactly what that was until you read it a few times. You can only imagine the voter. It gives you a GPS map directly to your precinct. Okay, you've been voting there for 30 years, but what about those folks in Livingston with the flood? We had to change those precincts on a dime. It gives you live where to go, just like you get in your automobile. You can follow the election live on your phone as the results come into my office. And I can also email blast you and remind you to go to the poll this Saturday or this Tuesday if it's a federal election, if you want me to on a voluntary basis. Where does this technology go? We're getting ready to go out on an RFP to change our voting equipment. Our voting equipment at the outlier is some 26 years old. The newest stuff is 12 to 15. It's time to replace. Every state is faced with the same problem. Now, we've kept up with technology and programming, but the body has started to wear and tear. And we're doing the best we can to Band-Aid that. But it's going to cost us a lot of money, not in the best of budgetary times, and we are dealing with that factor. But it'll be something as simple as it will appear like an iPad, an enlarged iPad. There would be a touch screen, not connected to the internet, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. And you'll be able to, you remember that mock vote that you took on this phone? You'll be able to take that if you want to go in an express line, pass it under the iPad, populate the screen, recheck your vote. If you want to change it, you can. And it'll also have the ability to spit out a paper ballot for you. You know how you voted here. You changed your mind with Tom. You don't want that scallywag anymore, so you vote me, my opponent. And then you can see on paper that it all matches, but it goes into a secure box before your vote is cast. We can't let you walk out with it. So that's the new technology. We will have some old machines, AVC machines, that we'll keep around for some time for elderly or people that are intimidated by this process that maybe still want to vote the old way, and we'll gradually wean ourselves off of that. The hacking. Ladies and gentlemen, I served as 1 year as president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, and I had the pleasure or displeasure, however you want to look at it, of addressing about 3 or 4 congressional committees on the issue of voter hacking, critical infrastructure, and some of the other issues of the day. And I'll leave you with this thought. How do you hack something in cyberspace that's not in cyberspace? No state votes online. And yet the infinite wisdom of our federal government, Homeland Security, put us into critical infrastructure with that main premise to protect us from hacking from the Russians, until they learned after the fact that no state votes online. They had never spoken to anyone who actually put on an election other than a high school election for the prom queen, okay? This is the federal government of which we in charge ourselves every day, okay? I'm not preaching to the choir here. That's one issue. The other issue is the hacking of the Democratic National Convention that started all of this. It's now being reported that possibly it wasn't a hack at all, it was probably an inside job of someone trying to data mine that information. Because the information is valuable. If you can get a list with your mother's maiden name and Social Security, hey, that's pretty good. Or if a donor list and what have you, you can do a lot of damage today with that type of information. So the vulnerability in the system for some states is the registration side of it. You have election day with machines, you have voter registration component. That's the list. Now, I'll tell you how we operate, and most states do. When you go on that online system, which is in the cloud, you would think you're maybe going into the whole system. So you go, oh, well, somebody could hack at that moment and get in. No. That information, you may think you are, but it goes in and there is a live body on the other side that separates that information from private information and the public information. So you're in a firewall. What occurred apparently in the state of Arizona and Illinois was that those 2 states did not have that firewall. And someone apparently did get in. They detected it immediately, which is good, reported it to the federal government. There was no changes made. There was evidence, and it was caught immediately. So there are systems out there that protect us, and I always caveat that by saying, look, we live in a world today of you go to the service station and you got the possibility of putting your card in and your information being hacked. I mean, it's just the world we live in. But the cavalier comments that are made publicly today on nightly news and information is just preposterous. If I give a machine, and I'll never forget this, I did a debate with 2 Princeton. Look, I went to UL, you know, I told you, and I don't mean that to discourage my university, but it's more to make fun of, you know, I was up against 2 Princeton University guys who were on WWL radio, and I did the same with a Harvard and MIT individual in Congress. They went on and on of how they could hack machines. You can. If I give you access to a voting machine and you from MIT, I would be disappointed if you couldn't figure out how to tinker with that. Okay? I mean, I couldn't, but the point being, but so what? They're not linked together. So you hack one voting machine. What they don't tell you is that you'd have to get only in Louisiana. If you figured out how to do that, you have to have a real good electric screwdriver or battery operated that's very quick, and undo the back panel, go in, do what you're going to do, put the panel back on, and do that to 10,200 machines in 64 different warehouses with cameras and locks, and nobody saw you. I would suggest to you it would be much easier, in my opinion, to go rabble-rouse all the people you would need to perfect this fraud and get them to vote the way you want to vote and affect the election in a legal way, okay? So, yeah, I think you get the picture. I mean, we've tried everything, the blue dog stickers, which became wildly successful beyond our wildest dream. Most of the time you get, I voted today, you throw it on the ground or you didn't care. These things became collector's items. Literally, we had people on eBay trying to sell these things for $25 a piece. We got $4 million for what, Meg? 14,000, I think. And I was criticized for that because I should have let that money go to a TOPS program. But it was the best marketing, best voter participation money I've ever spent in my life. The data collection. Let me expound on that a little bit. You know, there's been a lot of rhetoric about voter fraud, and we all have our opinions on voter fraud. It's the subject of the day. We all have our stories that our granddad told us, or our uncle, or we aware of, or whatever. Let me tell you the reality of voter fraud. Do I think voter fraud occurs? Yeah. To a large degree? No. Matter of fact, the only fraud that we really see is usually in small jurisdictional elections, and you know what it involves? This is the easiest voter fraud commitment that I could possibly show you. A pen, a paper ballot. It's usually what we discover is a nursing home component or frail and elderly get a paper ballot sent to them, and little Tom Schedler, who grew up in ABC, Louisiana, a population of 2,000, he grew up with Miss Susie and Mr. Joe, knocks on their door, canvassing, please give me your vote, and oh, by the way, can I fill out your mail ballot? Most elderlies are intimidated by it. They don't, oh, sure, absolutely, Tom. Well, need I tell you how they're going to vote? They have them sign it, give them the deal, and they mail it. We caught one guy, and I'll leave this city unnamed, that he won, I think it was by 6 or 7 votes, and we discovered that 15 mail ballots came from the same address. His house, his campaign headquarters. He didn't have enough brains to leave the return address of the people. So when we introduced Miss Susie and Mr. Joe, oh yeah, little Tommy came by, I've known him all my life, and oh yeah, I signed it, but he took the ballot. So how do you detect that? But it's usually in little small jurisdictionals, nothing to really affect the vote. Now we've all heard the stories, all the dead people vote. I'm sure they did in Louisiana 30, 40 years ago. I'm matter of fact, sure of it. Just like the boxes of ballots that weren't favorable to a certain committee went thrown into the Mississippi River. I actually have 2 of those old ballot boxes. A lot of that is folklore. It did exist, but with the systems we have today, with checks and balances, I would know if somebody's monkeying with your registration almost immediately. With photo ID, which I know is a controversial issue with some people, what better way to ascertain the ability of who you are and where you came from? There's other methods you can use, but to me it's the simplest and the most foolproof. Most of the complaints we get on that, quite frankly, all lead up to a presidential election from people from out of state. People in Louisiana don't really have a problem with it. Voter suppression. I have made this request at almost every speech I've gone to. Bring me a person in 2017 in Louisiana that feels voter suppressed, that he or she cannot register to vote, there's someone blocking you from doing that, and then after you register that someone is blocking you at the precinct that you can't vote. It's quite frankly just the opposite. It's voter depression, not suppression. That's why we started the Honor Vets program. It's symbolic. You can go on and give a veteran current past. I did my dad, my father-in-law from World War II. You get a certificate and a lapel pin. Doesn't cost you anything. You do as many as you want. It's just to say, you may hate the issue, you may hate the candidates, but can we all agree, Americans, not Ds, not Rs, not red states, not blue states, that we ought to at least go vote in the freest country in the world and exercise that right? You know, I mean, it's insane. Real quick, and then I'm going to switch in the last 10 minutes. I don't want to disregard my commercial division, which we're very proud of equally with elections. Too many elections in Louisiana. When I took over, I did a study with the legislative audits from December '05 to January 31st of 10, 60 months. Louisiana had 70, not 7, 70 elections in 60 months. The highest in the country, by far. Our voting machine vendor, you can't believe how many elections we have. Elections on top of elections on top of elections. You see a sign, vote today, and you go vote on what? I mean, you don't even know what the votes are going on. We have, over time, through some legislation, I think Franklin helped me with some of that early on, is reduced that, and we are now running at a clip of about 30 in that 60-month period, and we are on track for the next measuring stick, apple for apple, down to 25. That saves you millions of dollars. Millions. Let me give you an example. Treasurer's race that came out of the blue. My budget was going to be the lowest budget in years at $75 million. I had to go back to the legislature during the process after the budget came out and ask for another $6 million to have an election for a treasurer. Now let me just ask everybody in the audience, and I'm going to tease myself because I always used to say early on when I was elected, hello, I'm Tom Schedler, Secretary of State. Most people don't know who that is or who has the office. Nobody has a clue of what the office does, and the third group doesn't give a damn about even one or two. And I understand all of that. But quite frankly, we need to start looking and thinking a little bit more wisely with our elections. We have someone that's in the job right now that's doing the job. He's been doing a job behind Kennedy for like 15 years. He's running the place. Ron Henson, wonderful individual. Could have run for the office, elected not to. He's had the job now since Kennedy left in January, and will have it until his replacement's made. Everybody in here realizes that? We have a treasurer. He's an ex-banker, like myself. Who cares if he served another 6 months, 7 months, and jump on another election and save $6 million? I pose that question to joint budget. What would you have done with this $6 million? Tops, fix a road, do something of importance for longevity in Louisiana? But no, we're going to have an election. So that's what it cost us. I can't do anything about it other than voice my concern and my frustration. The legislature calls that, and I'm not taking a hit in the legislature. The law currently says we have to have the election, so I'm not blaming them, but we need to change the law, and we need to allow for appointment process, because probably the person who wins the treasurer's seat is going to be a current legislator. So guess what? What's going to happen now? Okay? House member wins, okay, he goes to Senate, okay, now we got to fill the House seat. So it's just a Mexican, I mean, we just keep going on and on and on with this. Okay, enough of that. Let me talk to you real quick about my commercial division. And we're very proud of that equally. We're very proud of our website. For those of you who go to it, we dramatically changed that. It's very user-friendly of it, and you have to look at my shiny face at the top of it. I apologize. But the bottom line is it's very efficient, very user-friendly, and that was my charge. When I arrived, it was so complicated, and I just said, make it for a dummy like me that I could do it. 101, Schedler usable. And they did it. And we get compliments from across the country from people that deal with Secretary of Law. My God, can you contact my Secretary of State and send them what you did with that website? Go biz. We became the third state in the country to offer a true one-stop shop. How many politicians have you heard over your day? Oh, we're going to create a one-stop shop. We've got it in Louisiana, or at least the start of it. We did it about 18 months ago, huh, Allison? You used to have to go to my website, reserve the LLC or corporate name, you file your documents, you take those documents to your friendly bank and you open your checking account, and then what do? You go to the Department of Revenue, you give all the same information you just gave me to get a revenue number. You leave them, you go to the Workforce Commission, the old Labor Department, get another number so you can do all your unemployment tax information. You don't do that anymore. You come to me up front, you spend about 5 extra minutes, but you don't go see the other agency. So when you file with me now, you get in a visual chat room, you get what we call a GoBiz number that you can go in and change at any time. If you don't have all the information, you can come back and pick up where you left off. But you get your revenue number, you get your workforce number, and you file with me all simultaneous. And we're planning on adding other agencies to that as we go. The Louisiana Economic Development for grant purposes, or fire marshal if that's something you may need. And it's just a matter of money. But we've got it set up and it's working fine. We have a system now if somebody tries to go in and monkey with your, believe it or not, that's a new thing, trying to steal a business. LLC, 4 partners and 3 of them gang up on one and remove that person's name unbeknownst to that person being removed. We have now alert systems that everybody gets alerted. And hey, there's something's happened, and if you aren't aware of it, you better contact us before we make it permanent. So we've done some good things. We're very proud of it. And we're dealing with more than less. We got less employees, but there are ways to still continue to offer services if you just think out the box a little bit. I'm formerly a businessman. Like I said, I was president of a bank. I look at everyone as a customer, not a taxpayer, although you're that too. But the last thing you want to be drawn into my office for is that you were discourteous to a customer. If anything, we get accolades for if it's something at revenue, pick up the phone and try to help them or direct them to somebody to take care of them. And you don't have to do that, but it's kind of a unique style in state government. So I'm going to leave it at that and leave it open for some questions. I know the rule's 1 o'clock, so if there's any questions, I can keep talking, but I'd rather do that.
I'm not just one. I want to devil's out too. Good for the board, and I'm from Kenner. But here's a question, and I hope this is not a stupid question. You said we could save $6 million by eliminating this election.
Well,
our governor, couldn't we get the special couldn't we get the legislature to come in and have a special session cheaper than $6 million? Tell the governor and say, look, who in this room would not want to save $6 million? I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Well, and let me just to clarify, and you're correct. I mean, that's accurate with what it is. However, since then, we've had some other things that have come on, so the savings would not be quite that, because subsequent to that, we had some other things. It would require constitutional amendment, which is doable. We'd have to have an election to let that happen. But I'm just planting the seed. I'm just planting the seed that if we start thinking, just like we've reduced those elections in that 60-month period, that we just need to start thinking a little clearer. And let me give you an example, and I compliment now Senator Kennedy. For 2 years as a member of Bond Commission, I pounded on the table about all these elections. Because special elections. How many of you go crazy when you vote down a tax and inside of 6 months later it's back on the ballot to see if you really meant no? Well, let me tell you how the law reads. It's an emergency. But of course in Louisiana we don't define what the emergency is. So the emergency is it didn't pass and we got to redo it. So your governing body, whether it be a Mosquito District or a police jury or a school board, they just vote emergency. They do the resolution, they call the election, it comes to the Bond Commission. In the past, it used to be just pretty much a done deal, because it's politics, who's going to turn it down. I'm proud to tell you that after asking Kennedy, before he left, form that committee, a subcommittee. I'm chairman. And we finally made poster boys and girls out of 4 entities. And we said, no. Sorry, Charlie, they told you no. Come back in a year. And the Bond Commission supported it. That has never happened in the history of Louisiana, to my knowledge. I mean, it's time to get that straight. My plan on that is very simple. You say that not in 6 months you can have an emergency. In 6 months period, you can't come back with a readdress. The emergency can be from 6 months to 12 months. And what does it do? It forces the bond attorneys to renew that tax outward instead of waiting for the last 9 months. That's what happens. They wait for the last minute, they forgot somebody. I mean, how hard is it to do a tickle file on a computer today that my revenue is about ready to expire? What would you do if in business that happened to you? Oh, I'm losing my biggest customer. Oh, I'll just wait until he decides to go elsewhere. That's effectively what they do. So I'm just saying that you know, I see Paula here and Franklin, that's one I'd like you to look at. I mean, just simply say, in the first 6 months after, sorry, you'll see a change of attitude and a change in process overnight when that happens. Because you can renew that tax at any time. You don't have to wait for the last year to do it. I don't suggest you do it at the halfway point, but I mean, 18, 24 months is not unheard of. That's good policy. Yes, anything else? Yeah.
You know, I am on the list of registered voters in the precinct, and I show up without a photo ID. What happens to me?
Okay. Well, first off, it's a twofold question. In a federal election, you do a provisional ballot. Okay. In a regular election, you would go to your precinct, they would see that you're on the list, and you fill out an affidavit. We do audit those affidavits, and you can be allowed to vote. And I always give the example, if I went fishing the day before election and my wallet fell off the bow of the boat, obviously I'm in a jam. What has happened in other states is that they do not have that provision to allow for that. And you can't vote. Well, that's where you get into disenfranchisement and NVRA and some national voting rights issues and what have you. But in Louisiana, we do allow that, and we do audit that. You got to be able to name your mother's maiden name, social security number, date of birth, and other factors, and you ascertain to that. Now, if you're lying, and I'll be quite honest with you, we are in the process of that audit right now from the 2016 presidential election, but when we did it for the last presidential election, we audited out of 50 parishes. We had, I think, 6 that we had to go back and take a second look at, and quite frankly, it was in at least 5 of those cases, somebody that had signature, had got Parkinson's or something, that their signature had changed. So we just haven't had a problem with it, but there is a solution to that. But in Linda, in a federal election, they do what's called provisional balloting. In a state election, local, we don't have that provision. It's an affidavit.
Many people show up with it without an ID.
Not many. We had, I can give you an example. Out of a 68% voter turnout, which is like almost 100% in a presidential election, I think we had 1,300 statewide.